Hello there, my name is Lisette Coly, and I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation and also the proud granddaughter of Eileen J. Garrett, our founder. Eileen Garrett, and I'll refer to her as Garrett, was a famous trance medium, entrepreneur, author, and a very interesting character. And I've just managed to put together a series of thematic writings, interviews with an interesting character who, at one point, when Garrett asked him his name, he said, "Well, you can call me Lucifer," which took her aback, but she always referred to him as the noble stranger. Her life is somewhat of an open book with many autobiographies and a biography by Alan Angoff. Eileen Garrett had no reticence in sharing her life story with researchers and journalists, as she really was very ambivalent about the source of her gifts, and she really wanted to know how she could bring forth the information that she did. And she was never totally sure that she was speaking to the world of spirits, whether that was something from within, possibly telepathy, or was she really in touch with the great beyond. So it's interesting that within research and literature, she never really spoke about the noble stranger, these interludes, and kept that somewhat very close to an intimate group of people and the immediate family. I, however, was pressed into service along with my mother, Eileen Coly, our second president, in transcribing the interviews that she had with Lucifer, or let's call him the noble stranger. She would write them down in yellow legal paper and pass them over to my mother and I, hot off the press, as it were, to memorialize. Those were typed up, they were put into a gigantic file, and that's where they sat for many, many years, Garrett dying in 1970. But I managed to find the file, and I thought, reading through it, that it's particularly interesting. So I managed to put the manuscript together and write a lengthy foreword, and here you have Call Me Lucifer, Dialogues with a Noble Stranger, published by Afterworlds Press. And I'm very thankful to them, who also seemed to feel that the materials that I had unearthed were useful for mankind, humankind. And to that extent, they're also going to be bringing back an autobiography of Garrett's. It wasn't published in the States, My Life as a Search for the Meaning of Mediumship. So you might want to make a note of that if you're somewhat interested as to who was Eileen Garrett and what was she doing with Lucifer. So I think at this point it would be helpful if I read from Garrett's own words as to her take on what was going on with these conversations. Although I'll read a little bit from the foreword that I wrote to sort of place the manuscript. In the first part of this book, Garrett describes her initial encounters with Lucifer, traces her history with them, and recounts their numerous conversations. Characteristically, she also interrogates her own reactions to the encounters, delving into her own psychology in relation to them, and even questions the nature of the noble stranger's existence or non-existence. How long she worked on the manuscript and for what purpose remains unknown. Yet another mystery surrounding Lucifer may be found in interviews between the American depth psychologist Ira Progoff and Garrett's first control, Uvani. With Garrett under trance, Progoff asked Uvani for more information about Lucifer, who would come to Garrett, as she wrote, while she was awake, while she walks by the sea, who stands beside her, over her shoulder, or in front of her. He was the one, she said, with whom she argues, and who argues with her, and who speaks with her about her confusions, as Progoff portrayed it. In response, Uvani communicated through Garrett that Lucifer was, in fact, one and the same as Tehote, yet another control from the ancient pagan world. Uvani described Tehote as a great teacher, a great life keeper, and the giver of signs and words, a being of great power who has walked among men for many eons. He added somewhat ominously, "I hope she treats him with respect." Progoff concluded that Lucifer was another psychic representation of the Tehote figure, though that gets us no closer to a real understanding of the nature of these entities. By the way, I might interject that Uvani was her one of two primary controls, that if you had a sitting with her, he would appear first, not appear, but he would come to the fore, and he was acting as the gatekeeper. And you would state your purpose, and he would go about trying to find someone who could help you with the information that you were looking for. Dr. Abdul Latif was a doctor, a physical healer, and he was very interested in health matters and also spirituality. So just a little clarification when I talk about Uvani and Abdul Latif. But in any case, let's move on to hearing what Garrett herself had to say about her noble stranger. He did appear to her as a child, 3 or 4, and he would intermittently, he never came when she called him. She had to wait for the invitation, and he would just spontaneously appear. As he did, she writes, in 1936, standing outside of Harrods department store in Kensington, London, I became aware of a man who caused my heart to beat wildly. I was unable to walk away. I believe to this day that he approached me with an air of a schoolmaster and advised me that introspection in front of a store of this nature produced temptation to spend monies that would be better employed in acquiring knowledge more helpful to my nature than looking at various things within the shop far beyond my economic reach. Instead, this figure seriously advised that my spare hours of recreation would be better employed by visiting the Museum of Natural History nearby. I found myself at the door of the museum, and he disappeared. So you can see, and you'll understand more as I share this commentary of Lucifer, that there's a lot of confusion about this book, that people think that he's going to be the red devil with a pitchfork and a tail and be evil in the Hollywood fashion. And in point of fact, Garrett described him as very witty, charming, sarcastic. He really made her think. So that's at odds with what people may be thinking they're going to find if you pick up a tome, this particular volume. Let's see. She writes that when I asked him if he associated himself with any particular doctrine, he was sardonic and replied, "Certainly not. Man himself has made his own ideal to take upon himself the power and glory to decide what is righteous and what is good. All dogmas from the beginning of time have grown from man's own fear of the kingdom, which he is permitted to inherit. These dogmas speak of love, but they rarely contain anything that is truly charitable. His speeches are curiously and beautifully molded. There's neither good nor evil in his pronouncements, nor does he seek to make clear that good and evil are opposites. He admits of many aspects to his nature, conflict and dualism being parts of it. He remarks that he best serves those who speak so sternly of the moral codes. Be certain, he emphasizes, that the codes are not for themselves, but for others. He rarely speaks of love as such, but remarks that man is inherently on a long journey which goes far beyond his present lifespan, that the substance of his mind and will must be tempted many times, so it's useless, he says, to speak of good and evil as though they were opposites. What is good for one may not be so good for one's neighbor. Man is better off by living from within and finding his own way without rites, invocations, or in the need of power. If man says that this is not so, it stems from the hypocrisy which is deep in the nature of man's thinking. I asked after this statement, do you claim any particular group to have given you to this world? To which he replied, if you mean the Jewish or Christian, Assyrian, Roman, or Etruscan, the answer is no. Each generation has need of me. The act of getting into contact with a great vital force is not part of man's heritage yet. I asked him at this point, do you appear in the days when men were unable to use the written word? He said, long before, for man has always hieroglyphics by which to confuse their enemies. The appearance of the artistic or written word are the hieroglyphs which man used for centuries. They were of themselves arts which concealed the true meaning from the untutored. But it was in the days when man was more simple and the priests made the theater which gave man the sense of being in contact with something better than himself. By the way, I apologize that you may hear some drilling in the background, and I've been waiting to have a period of time free of the drilling, but at this point Just please bear with me. I don't think it's Lucifer necessarily boring through the wall, but in any case, forgive me. Garrett goes on to say, I acquire about rituals, the covens with special foods, delicious and delicate, served with obscenity. Yes, yes, all of that. One of his more thoughtful and sober statements is, man conceived it all and eats of it until the full consciousness of decay takes over. This consciousness is always abroad to take over alike the community and the solitary. Man will pursue his malefic art and demand an accomplice as long as the planet lasts. He speaks of two schools forever busy, those who reject evil with sternness to cause untold happiness, and those who neglect it altogether to be overcome by it. He also told me, here your people are bothering about Russia, but nobody thinks of the wiser people, the Chinese, who 25 years from this day will become such a terrible menace. Your country, your new country, and he's referring to the United States as she emigrated, is therefore like a doxy who thinks only in terms of her hat or her gown and whose underclothes are not given any thought. Take off the hat and the gown and your new country will find itself bereft of decent underclothing, for this is where the menace lies. In trying to understand the meaning of all this, she writes, I suppose that my tantamount need for the noble stranger is obtaining the answers to my questions. Just who are you? What is heaven? What is God? What or who are these guardians? Who are these masters? Where are you in longitude and latitude? Are you under the waters or above? Where is your home? He turns my questions back on me and asks, well, where are you? Do you know? Aren't you between two oceans? Where is your longitude and latitude? Wherever you find yourself, a man finds himself. There is my home. This gives me puzzlement, which requires a good deal of reflection. But most of my need of him, and it is undoubtedly a very egocentric need perhaps, is that I'm concerned with my daily task, which is doing the right thing with and for people. I'm concerned for the progress of my life in what I have always determined the right lines. But in my lifetime, with my peculiar gifts, I yearn to come in the door and pass out the gate knowing what happened. And so my questioning is a very real need and desire in my heart to understand the meaning of God. Well, don't we all want to understand that? But now you have perhaps a bit of the flavor of Lucifer. At the end of the part 2 of the book, I happened to find a file, again, that was lying, under tons of dust. And it was a series of questions and answers. And I've styled it as calling it Lucifer's Compendium of Guidance. And he speaks on different themes: egoism, confusion, feeling overwhelmed, etc. And in one point of fact, there's one that speaks very strongly to me, entitled On Forgetting the Past. Many of you may know that the Parapsychology Foundation is in very poor financial condition, and as such I was concerned about the legacy and the survivability of the Eileen J. Garrett very fine research library that we've maintained since 1951. And I'm very happy to say that I found a wonderful home for it at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, in the Alvin O. Kuhn Library. It maintains its name, it's part of the special collection, and I'm very relieved. However, this took an emotional toll on me, in that I grew up literally in the library, and I felt terrible that I no longer could maintain it the way I wanted to, and hence had to let it go. So I've been reviewing sort of my life past review and feeling very upset, until which time I read this piece of wisdom from Lucifer, which I'll share. On Forgetting the Past. The past is past. The things of the past have served their purpose. It is in the system of evolution that you move on. Man is the only one of God's creatures who drags the past around his neck. Do not think that the rest of evolution thinks of the pangs of yesteryear. Man would live so cleanly, so finely with each other if he would only forget. If you could only ever manage to stop talking of what your fathers did and what your forefathers did and take the good time to make good in the moment, then there would not be the necessity today, the insecurity basis, which you will have to meet a little later. The past has been important, it has been useful. Throw the echoes of the past out into the universe with the greatest kindliness. Let them be useful to somebody else. They are the frills of yesteryear. So that speaks to me, and I think that there'll be other things that perhaps you might resonate too. So do try and pick up a copy of Call Me Lucifer. It's available in bookstores, Amazon, Afterworlds Press. My editor, Dr. Gregory Shushan, should be thanked profusely, which I do herewith. And tell me what you think. Call Me Lucifer, Dialogues with a Noble Stranger. Thank you for your attention.